There are places in this world that don't want to be found, places that exist on maps but somehow resist being visited. And sometimes, when someone finally does stumble into one of these places, they learn exactly why the locals stopped going there generations ago. The story I'm about to share with you came from a listener who inherited property in rural Appalachia. What they found waiting for them in those hills made them abandon everything and never look back. This story is called The Hollow That Remembers, and I promise you, after hearing this, you'll think twice before accepting any inheritance that sounds too good to be true. I never knew my great-uncle Vernon. He was my grandmother's brother, the one nobody talked about, the one who left West Virginia in the 1970s and never came back for holidays or funerals or anything else. When the lawyer called me last September to tell me Vernon had died and left me his property, I didn't even know he'd moved back to the state. 87 acres, the lawyer said. House, barn, and outbuildings. All yours, free and clear. I was 31 years old, drowning in student debt, working a dead-end IT job in Columbus. The idea of owning land, real land, felt like winning some kind of cosmic lottery. I asked the lawyer why Vernon had left it to me specifically. We'd never met, never exchanged so much as a birthday card. He was very specific in his will, the lawyer said. He wrote that you were the only one young enough and stubborn enough to handle it. I should have asked what he meant by that. Instead, I put in my 2 weeks' notice, packed everything I owned into my Honda Civic, and drove south. The property was in a county I'd never heard of, tucked into the mountains near the border with Virginia. The GPS kept losing signal on the winding roads, and by the time I found the turnoff, I'd been driving for almost an hour without seeing another car. The road to Vernon's place wasn't paved. It was barely a road at all, just 2 dirt tracks disappearing into dense forest. I crept along at maybe 5 miles an hour, branches scraping against my windows, until the trees suddenly opened up and I saw the house. It was old, but solid. 2 stories, wood siding painted white sometime in the last century, a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on one end. Behind it, I could see the barn the lawyer had mentioned, its red paint faded to a rusty brown. And beyond that, nothing but trees climbing up at the mountainside, thick and dark and endless. The key was under a rock by the front steps, exactly where the lawyer said it would be. The inside smelled like dust and old newspapers, but it was clean. Cleaner than I expected for a house that had been empty for 3 weeks. Someone had covered the furniture with sheets and emptied the refrigerator. There was even a note on the kitchen table. Welcome home. Don't go into the hollow after dark. Don't answer if something calls your name. And whatever you do, don't follow the lights. Margaret Phelps, your neighbor down the road. I laughed when I read it. It felt like something from a horror movie, the kind of warning that only exists to be ignored. I figured Margaret was either senile or having fun with the new city kid. I crumpled up the note and threw it away. The first week was fine. Better than fine, actually. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, explored the property, started making plans. The barn needed work, but the bones were good. The well water tested clean. I even found an old orchard behind the house, apple trees that had gone wild but might produce again with some care. At night, I sat on the porch and listened to sounds I'd never heard in the city. Owls, coyotes, wind moving through thousands of trees. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't known I needed. I met Margaret Phelps on day 8. She came up the road in an ancient pickup truck, bringing a casserole and what she called a proper welcome. She was maybe 70, with gray hair pulled back in a bun, and eyes that seemed to be evaluating everything at once. You read my note? She asked, before I could even thank her for the food. I did. And you thought I was crazy. I thought you were being colorful. She didn't smile. Vernon thought the same thing when he came back. Took him about a month to learn different. Took him another 40 years to figure out how to live with it. Live with what? Margaret looked past me, toward the mountain rising behind the property. The sun was getting low, and the shadows between the trees had grown deep and dark. The hollow, she said. About a half-mile up that slope, there's a hollow. You'll know it when you see it. The trees grow different there. Nothing else grows at all. The old folks called it the remembering place, though I don't think anyone alive knows why anymore. What's wrong with it? Something lives there. Something that was here before the Cherokee, before anyone. It mostly keeps to itself, stays in the hollow during the day, but at night it wanders, it watches, and sometimes, if you're not careful, it takes an interest. I waited for her to crack a smile, to admit she was pulling my leg. She didn't. Vernon spent 40 years learning its rules, she continued. He kept notebooks, dozens of them. They should be somewhere in the house. I suggest you read them. She left before dark, driving her truck back down the dirt road with what felt like unnecessary urgency. I ate her casserole and told myself she was just a lonely old woman who'd lived too long in isolation. These mountain communities had their stories, their superstitions. It didn't mean anything. But that night, I started looking for Vernon's notebooks. I found them in the basement in a locked trunk that took me an hour to break into. There were 47 notebooks spanning 4 decades, filled with Vernon's cramped handwriting. I started reading and didn't stop until the sun came up. Vernon had first encountered it in October of 1982, 2 weeks after moving back to the property he'd inherited from his own father. He'd been walking the land, learning its boundaries, when he found the hollow Margaret had described. It was exactly as she said. The trees grew at wrong angles there, twisted and malformed, their bark darker than it should have been. Nothing grew on the ground. No grass, no weeds, no fallen leaves. Just bare earth, hard-packed and gray, in a perfect circle, maybe 50 yards across. Vernon felt something watching him from the hollow. He wrote that it was like standing in front of a predator, knowing it could strike at any moment. Knowing that running wouldn't help. He backed away slowly, returned to the house, and didn't sleep for 3 days. Over the following weeks, he learned more. The thing in the hollow was old, impossibly old. The local families had stories going back to the first settlers in the 1700s, and even then, the tales described something that had already been here for generations. It had no name that anyone knew. People just called it the Hollow, or sometimes the Remembering, though the second term was used carefully and rarely. It was most active at night. That was when it left the hollow and walked the mountain. Vernon wrote that he sometimes heard it moving through the trees near the house, heavy footsteps that stopped just at the edge of his property and went no further. He never saw it clearly, not in those first years. Just shadows that were darker than they should have been, just shapes that moved when the wind didn't. The lights were something else. On certain nights, usually when the moon was dark, lights would appear in the forest. Pale and cold, somewhere between white and blue, they floated between the trees like lanterns being carried by invisible hands. Vernon wrote that they were beautiful. He also wrote that they were a trap. The lights led toward the hollow, always toward the hollow, and anyone who followed them never came back right. He described 3 cases he knew of personally. A hunter in 1984 who followed the lights and was found 2 days later, sitting in the middle of the hollow, unable to speak or recognize his own family. He spent the rest of his life in a care facility, and all he ever did was draw the same symbol over and over. A spiral with too many turns. A teenager in 1991 who went into the woods on a dare and came back with white hair and eyes that wouldn't focus. She said, Time moved differently in the hollow. She said years had passed in there, though she'd only been gone for one night. And a property surveyor in 2003 who simply vanished. They found his equipment at the edge of the hollow, arranged in a neat pile, but never found him. Vernon's notebooks were meticulous. He tracked patterns. The thing in the hollow was more active during certain seasons, certain weather conditions. It seemed drawn to certain sounds. It absolutely hated fire, which was why Vernon always kept lanterns burning on his porch at night. And it could mimic voices. That was the detail that chilled me most. Vernon described nights when he'd hear his dead wife calling him from the trees, his father, friends who'd moved away decades ago. The voices were perfect, indistinguishable from the real thing, except that they always came from the direction of the hollow. They always asked him to come outside. They always said they needed help. He never answered. He never went. If you're still with me this deep into these woods, listening to this man's 4 decades of careful documentation, I want you to know something. Stories like this survive because people like you keep them alive, because you listen in the dark, because you share them with others, because you come back episode after episode to hear what lurks just outside the firelight. If this channel has become part of that ritual for you, consider subscribing. Not for me, but because there are so many more stories waiting to be told, and I want you there when I tell them. I spent 3 days reading Vernon's notebooks, barely sleeping, barely eating. By the end, I was looking at the mountain differently. The trees that had seemed so peaceful now felt like they were hiding something. Every shadow had weight. Every sound in the night made me freeze. On the 4th day, I went to find the hollow. I know. After everything Vernon wrote, after Margaret's warning, after all of it, I still went. But I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if this was real, or if I had inherited property from a man who'd spent 40 years suffering from some kind of delusion. It was a bright October morning, cool and clear, the sun turning the fall leaves into golden fire. I figured if there was ever a safe time to investigate, this was it. I even brought precautions. A compass that immediately started spinning the wrong direction once I got within a quarter mile. A GPS that lost all signal despite clear sky overhead. A camera that would later show only static for every photo I took past a certain point. I found the hollow exactly where Vernon described it. The trees really did grow wrong there. Their trunks curved and twisted, like they were trying to pull away from the center. The bark was darker, almost black in places, and I noticed there were no birds singing nearby. The forest had been full of sound moments before, and now it was utterly silent. The hollow itself was just as Vernon wrote, a perfect circle of bare gray earth, maybe 50 yards across, nothing growing. No leaves on the ground despite the trees shedding all around it, and at the center, barely visible from where I stood at the edge, there was a stone, old and worn, and covered in marks that might have been natural weathering, but probably weren't. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just looking. The morning sun was bright, and everything seemed normal enough, but I could feel something. That sensation Vernon described, of being watched, of being evaluated. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. My hands were shaking. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. So I did. I backed away slowly, just like Vernon had 40 years before, and I didn't turn around until I was well down the mountain. When I finally looked back, I could have sworn I saw something standing at the hollow's edge, just for a second. A shape that was too tall and too thin, with proportions that didn't make sense. Then the trees shifted in the wind, and it was gone. I wanted to leave, pack my car and drive back to Columbus and pretend none of this had ever happened, but something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness, like Vernon's lawyer had said. Maybe it was the fact that I had nowhere else to go. Or maybe, and this is the part that keeps me up at night, maybe something wanted me to stay. I started following Vernon's rules instead. Every night, I lit lanterns on the porch and kept them burning until dawn. I never went outside after dark, no matter what I heard. And I heard things. Footsteps circling the house, branches breaking in patterns that were too regular to be random, and voices. God, the voices. My mother, who'd been dead for 6 years, asking me to come outside and look at the stars. My college roommate asking if I needed help with something in the barn. My own voice, sometimes, coming from the trees, saying words I would never say. I never answered. I never went. Weeks passed. The thing in the hollow tested me, but it never came closer than the tree line. Vernon's notes said the property had been marked somehow by previous generations, protected by agreements and rituals that nobody remembered anymore. As long as I followed the rules, I was safe. Uncomfortable and terrified, but safe. Then November came, and everything changed. It was a Thursday, cold and gray, the kind of day that felt like the world was holding its breath. I was in the barn, trying to repair some of the old stalls, when I heard a car coming up the road. I stepped outside to see a silver Subaru parking next to my Honda. A woman got out, late 20s, blonde hair, city clothes. She looked nervous and excited at the same time. "Are you the owner?" she asked. "I'm doing research for my graduate thesis, Appalachian folklore and local legends. Someone in town told me about your property." Her name was Dr. Elise Morton. She was a graduate student at WVU, and she wanted to know about the hollow. I should have sent her away. I should have told her there was nothing here, just old stories and overactive imaginations. But I was lonely. I hadn't talked to another human being in weeks, not really, and she seemed so genuinely interested, so eager to hear what I knew. I told her about Vernon's notebooks. I showed her the entries. I even took her to the edge of the hollow during the bright middle of the day and let her document everything with her own camera. Her camera worked, which surprised me. Maybe the hollow was more accepting of strangers, or maybe it was just curious. Elise stayed for dinner. We talked until the sun started setting, and then she said she needed to head back to her motel in town. I walked her to her car, and that's when I made my mistake. "Listen," I said. "I know this sounds crazy, but please don't come back after dark. Don't come back to this property after sunset, no matter what. And if you hear anything calling you from the woods, do not answer." She laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of laugh people give when they think you're being charmingly superstitious. "I'm a folklorist," she said. "I know how these stories work. They're metaphors. Warnings about real dangers dressed up in supernatural clothing. This hollow of yours is probably just unstable ground, or a place where people got lost and hurt themselves." "It's not," I said. "I'll be fine," she said. "Thank you for today. This is going to be an amazing chapter in my thesis." She drove away. I went inside and lit my lanterns and tried to convince myself that she would be okay. She was an adult. She'd heard my warning. She had no reason to come back at night, but something felt wrong. Something felt planned. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Elise. "I'm at the trailhead near your property. I want to get some nighttime footage of the area. Is that okay?" I called her immediately. No answer. I texted back, telling her to leave, that she was in danger, that she needed to go right now. No response. I watched my phone for 20 minutes, and then I did something I'd promised myself I would never do. I went outside after dark. The lanterns on my porch cast a small circle of light, but beyond that, the darkness was absolute. No moon, No stars, just blackness and the sounds of the forest. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the road, calling Elise's name. I found her car at the trailhead, empty, the engine still warm. Her phone was on the passenger seat, showing our text conversation. But there was another text I hadn't seen, one that had come before mine. It was from my number. Come to the trailhead. I have something to show you. It's safe. I promise. I hadn't sent that text. I hadn't sent anything until after she texted me. Something had used my voice, my number. Something had lured her out here. And now she was in the woods, probably heading exactly where it wanted her to go. I should have gone back to the house, should have called the police, should have waited for dawn, should have done anything except what I actually did. But I kept hearing Vernon's notebooks in my head, all those people who'd followed the lights and never come back right. Elise didn't know the rules. She didn't know what she was dealing with. I went into the woods after her. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is the part where everything goes wrong, where the rules get broken and the consequences come due. And you might be right. But if you've listened this far, if you've walked this deep into the dark with me, then you understand something. You understand that sometimes we make choices we can't take back. Sometimes we walk into the hollow knowing we might not walk out. If you're the kind of person who faces that darkness, who needs to know what happens next, then you already belong here. That subscribe button is just making it official. The forest at night was different. Not just dark, but wrong. The trees seemed closer together than they should have been. The ground seemed to shift under my feet. My flashlight beam felt thinner somehow, like the darkness was pressing against it, trying to squeeze it out. I followed the trail toward the hollow, calling Elise's name every few minutes. Sometimes I thought I heard her responding, but the direction kept changing. First from ahead of me, then to my left, then behind me. The voice was perfect, exactly her voice, exactly her tone, but it was always coming from the direction of the hollow. I didn't follow it. I kept to the trail instead, sweeping my flashlight back and forth, looking for any sign of where she had actually gone. That's when I saw the lights. They appeared between the trees to my right, pale and cold and beautiful. They drifted slowly, like will-o-wisps in old stories, and there was something hypnotic about them. I understood immediately why people followed them. Every instinct in my body wanted to walk toward them, to see where they led, to understand what they were. Instead, I shined my flashlight directly at them. Vernon's notes said they couldn't stand direct light, and he was right. The lights flickered and retreated, disappearing into the deeper forest. But for just a second, in the space where they'd been, I saw something standing between the trees. It was tall, 8 feet, maybe more. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at angles that made my eyes hurt. Its skin, if you could call it skin, was the color of old wood, rough and cracked, and its face. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. Then my flashlight flickered, just once, and it was gone. I ran, not toward the house, not toward safety, but forward, toward the hollow, because somewhere in that darkness, Elise was lost, and I was the only one who could find her. The hollow was glowing when I reached it, a faint luminescence rising from the bare ground, turning everything the color of old bones. And there, at the center, near the ancient stone, Elise was standing. She wasn't moving. Her back was to me, her arms at her sides. Her head tilted up like she was looking at stars that weren't there. She was whispering something I couldn't quite hear, words in a language I didn't recognize. "Elise!" I shouted. She didn't respond. I stepped into the hollow. The moment my foot touched that gray earth, I understood why Vernon had never gone in. The air changed. The temperature dropped. and something noticed me. Something that had been focused on Elise turned its attention in my direction, and the weight of it nearly drove me to my knees. The thing was in the hollow with us. I couldn't see it clearly, just impressions, movement at the edges of my vision, shapes that didn't hold together when I tried to focus on them. But it was there, and it was old, and it was angry that I'd interrupted. I grabbed Elise's arm. She was ice cold, her skin the texture of bark. Her eyes were open but unfocused, fixed on something I couldn't see. "We have to go," I said. "We have to go right now." She didn't move. Her lips kept shaping those whispered words, and I realized with horror that her voice was being recorded somehow, memorized, added to whatever collection the hollow kept. I started pulling her toward the edge. Every step felt like walking through water, thick and resistant. The ground seemed to stick to my feet. The whispers grew louder, not just from Elise anymore, but from everywhere. Voices layered on voices, calling my name, asking me to stay, promising things I didn't want to hear. We reached the edge of the hollow. I pushed Elise across first, and the moment she crossed that boundary, she collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. I followed a second later, stumbling and falling beside her. Behind us, something screamed. Not a human sound, not an animal sound. Something older and stranger and full of a rage that had been building for longer than I could comprehend. The glow from the hollow intensified, and I saw it then, standing where we'd been moments before. It was looking at me, at us, and I understood with perfect clarity that we had gotten away only because it let us, because it wasn't done with us yet, because now it knew our faces, our voices, our fears. I half carried, half dragged Elise back to the house. She was unconscious but breathing. I got her inside, locked every door and window, and kept the lanterns burning until dawn. She woke up around noon the next day. She didn't remember anything after parking at the trailhead. She didn't remember walking to the hollow, didn't remember standing at its center. Didn't remember any of it, but she knew something was wrong. She could feel it, she said, like something was missing, like something had been taken. She left that afternoon. I never saw her again. I've been here for 8 months now. I follow Vernon's rules religiously. I keep the lanterns burning. I never go out after dark. I never answer the voices, even when they sound exactly like people I love. But something has changed. The thing in the hollow is more active now. It circles the house every night, closer than before. The voices are more frequent, more personal. It knows things about me, private things I've never told anyone. It whispers them from the trees like secrets shared between friends. And last week, I started finding things on my porch in the mornings. Small things. A button from my childhood coat. My father's wedding ring, the one we buried with him. A photograph of me as a baby that should be in a box in Columbus. It's not trying to scare me anymore. It's showing me that it can reach me, that Vernon's protections are fading, that sooner or later, the rules won't be enough. I've started copying Vernon's notebooks, sending them to people I trust, people who might continue his work if something happens to me. Margaret Phelps is dying. She told me last month. She's the last of the old families, the last one who remembers anything useful. When she's gone, I'll be alone out here with something that has been waiting since before this land had a name. I don't know how this story ends. I don't know if I'll be here next month or next year, but I know this. The hollow remembers. It remembers everyone who's ever come near it, everyone who's ever seen those lights, everyone who's ever heard a familiar voice calling from the dark. And once it remembers you, it never forgets. Here's the thing about stories like this one. They don't really end. They just keep going, passed from one person to the next, keeping memories alive that maybe should have stayed buried. If the story found its way into your head, If you're going to be thinking about hollow places and watching lights and familiar voices in the dark, then maybe you understand why I do what I do. Maybe you understand why these stories matter. Subscribing isn't about numbers or algorithms. It's about being part of a community that gathers around the fire and shares what it's seen, and I'd be honored to have you there. It's stories like this that remind me why Appalachia has some of the most chilling folklore in America. The mountains keep secrets, the hollows remember, and sometimes those secrets reach out and touch the people who wander too close. Well, that is, if the story is just fiction. Like many accounts sent to me, the author claims every word is true. If it is, I hope you find safety from whatever waits in those hills. If not, thank you for one of the most unsettling submissions I've received in a long time. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.